Okay, so we're going to be looking at quadratics today. This is actually the last unit before your final. So after we finish this unit, we're going to start studying for finals a little bit, and then we'll take our final and be done with the year. So let's take a look at quadratic equations. The standard form of a quadratic equation looks like this. And you've seen this before, okay, where A, B, and C are filled in. So you know how you usually say A equals, B equals, C equals? This is called the standard form, and we've been putting equations into standard form where the x squared has to come first, then the x, then no x. So A, B, and C are actually going to be numbers when you see it in examples, okay? Like down here. A is 1, B is 2, and C is -5, something like that. When graphed, a quadratic equation creates a U-shaped curve called a parabola. So the actual graph, it'll look either like this or like this, depending on if it opens up or down, okay? So it says use your graphing calculator, but we don't have graphing calculators. If you do, awesome, you can use it, but let's use Desmos to sketch the following. So if you go to Desmos and you start graphing, you can actually graph these in Desmos just to check your work, which I'm going to show you later because it's a really, really great way to be able to check your work. But you're just sketching. So the word sketch doesn't mean draw perfectly, it means sketch. So if you put this in Desmos, it's going to look something like this. Again, it's a sketch. That's why there's no like dashes or numbers on these lines. So we know it opens up because you see the x squared, the sign in front is a positive. It's a +1, right? A is 1. If it's a positive number, it's going to be opening up. If it's a negative number in front, it's going to be opening down. So that's a key thing to remember. Okay, so this line right here is called the axis of symmetry. Notice how it goes directly, it splits the graph in half. So it splits this parabola in half, right? So it's going to always go directly through the center. That's called the axis of symmetry. And symmetry means that this side equals this side, okay? Now, this one is going to be opening down because of that negative, and that's the axis of symmetry again because it divides the graph equally in half. It goes through this point called the vertex, and we'll get to that later. So if A is positive, then the parabola opens up. See how A here is 1? It's positive, so it opens up like a smile. If A is negative, it opens down like a frown. So this is an example of, this is a parabola opening up, positive. A is positive. This is a parabola opening down because A right there is a negative. Okay. Let's talk about the axis of symmetry. So the vertical line that divides the parabola into two equal parts. So it's this line. This is the axis of symmetry right there. And you always do it with a dashed line, so it's going to look like this. So the vertical line, remember vertical looks like this. Horizontal, you could think of horizon where it's left to right. Vertical line is always drawn up or down. And it divides the parabola into two equal parts. So the formula for the axis of symmetry is x equals -b over 2a. Okay, the vertex, there's a lot of definitions before we get into this. So the vertex is the turning point of the parabola. So I'm going to go back to the other page really quick. You see how it goes, like this parabola, it's starting to go down, 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 and you see at this point it turns and it starts going up. That point that goes through this axis of symmetry, that's the vertex. You see how here it's kind of going up, 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 and then it hits this point, and now it's going to go down. That point where it hits the axis of symmetry is called the vertex. So that's what your vertex is, the turning point of the parabola. So when the vertex is the lowest point, it's called a minimum. And when the vertex is the highest point, it's called a maximum. So going back to our example, here, this right here is a maximum, and this vertex here is a minimum. Okay. So find the axis of symmetry and vertex, then sketch each parabola. So sketch again doesn't mean draw it perfectly, it means just sketch where it is. So pretty much we're going to look at the axis of symmetry first. Now look at the formula for the axis of symmetry. I'm going to rewrite it down here. You see how it says x equals negative b over 2a? Well, we want to label a, b, and c. And we're used to doing this. A is 1, b is 8, c is 15. So if we plug in b and a to this equation, it's going to be negative b, or negative 8, right, over 2 times, this multiplication, 2 times a, so 2 times 1. So all we did is plug in b was 8, a was 1. The whole entire equation here is a negative. That's why the negative goes on the outside. So let's multiply this first. So 2 times 1 is 2, so it's going to be negative 8 over 2. What's negative 8 divided by 2? 4. Negative 4. So that means that the axis of symmetry excuse me, is x equals negative 4. We always want to say x equals. Notice even the equation, like the formula, says x equals negative b over 2a. So we want to make sure when we finish the negative b over 2a part, we write x equals that number. Now our vertex, we're going to write this exact equation, y equals x squared plus 8x plus 15, which I got from right here. And we're going to plug in what we got for x. So we're going to plug in x is negative 4 to this x and to that x to find y. So negative 4 goes here, negative 4 squared, plus 8 times negative 4 plus 15. So all we did was plug in negative 4 where we saw the x. So let's do this part first. Negative 4 squared is negative 4 times negative 4, which is positive 16. 8 times negative 4 is negative 32 plus 15. I just brought that 15 down. And then we just simplify. So you can put all that in your calculator and you're going to get y equals negative 1. Okay, so my vertex now is going to be whatever point I plugged in for x, which is my axis of symmetry, so negative 4, comma, your y point, which is negative 1. Okay, so let's sketch. Now, I know, I'm not even going to draw the graph, I'm just going to draw a sketch. I know that the parabola opens up because a over here is a positive. It's positive 1. So it's going to be opening like a smiley face. Then I'm going to draw my axis of symmetry, which is always a dashed line going through the center. And I'm going to label this x equals negative 4. That's what I got for my axis of symmetry. This point down here is called your vertex, and that point I'm going to label negative 4, negative 1. Okay, that's all we're doing for today. So let's try number 2. So let's label A, B, and C. A is negative 1, B is 10, and C is negative 23. I'm going to rewrite my axis of symmetry equation, and I'm going to plug in B and A. So x equals negative, because that's part of my equation is a negative, B, which is 10, all over 2 times A, which is negative 1. Okay, now I'm going to keep that negative 10, and then 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. Negative 10 over negative 2 is a positive 5. So remember when we write it, we have to write x equals whatever number we got here, because that's part of our formula, x equals. Now our vertex, remember we rewrite this equation, and we're just going to plug in our axis of symmetry, what x equals, and we're going to plug that in for x. So negative, and then I have a 5 squared equals 10 times 5 minus 23. Okay, now this part is really important. Do you see how this negative is part of the equation here? I'm going to bring that negative down. Am I squaring the negative? No, it's negative x squared. All I did was plug in 5 for x, right? 5 for x. So that negative keeps coming down, and I'm just going to square this 5. So 5 squared is 25. But that negative comes down because that's part of the equation. It doesn't mean negative 5 squared. It means negative parenthesis 5 squared. Okay. So plus 50 minus 23. If I put all that in my calculator, I'm going to get y equals 2. So remember my vertex is always x comma y. So 5 comma 2. And I'm going to sketch it. So it's going to be opening down because a is negative. And then my axis of symmetry is x equals 5. So I'm going to draw a dotted dashed line right through the vertex. I'm going to label that the vertex 5, 2, and my axis symmetry is x equals 5 right here. And that vertex is 5, 2. Okay, so label A, B, and C. I'm going to rewrite my axis of symmetry formula, and then I'm going to plug in B. So now notice B is negative 12, but part of my formula is negative. So x equals negative B, which is negative 12, over 2 times 3. So notice that negative came from the equation, and then that negative 12 is just because that's my B. So a negative next to a negative like that, you make it a positive. See how there's two negatives? That's going to be a positive 12, and 2 times 3 is 6. So 12 over 6 is 2, and that's my axis of symmetry, x equals 2. Now I'm going to plug in 2 to my original equation, my quadratic equation. I'm going to plug in 2 for x, so 3 times 2 squared minus 12 times 2 plus 5. I always remember PEMDAS. So see that 2 squared? You have to do the exponent first. So because of PEMDAS, parentheses and exponents come first, and then we multiply next. So we have to do this. If you multiply 3 times 2 and then square it, you're going to get a different answer and you're going to get it wrong. So do 2 squared first. Always square first and then multiply that number. So 2 squared is 4. And then minus 12 times 2 is minus 24 plus 5. Now I multiply 3 times 4. 3 times 4 is 12 minus 24 plus 5. So y equals negative 7. So let's just look back up here really quick. If I did 3 times 2, that's 6. And then if I squared 6, that's 36, right? But we didn't get 36 when we did 2 squared first and then multiplied it by 3. We got 12. So make sure you always do the exponents first and then you multiply. So my vertex is 2, negative 7. The sketch is going to open up because A again is positive, so it opens this way. I'm going to draw a dashed line for the axis symmetry, and that's x equals 2, which is what I got over here. And then my vertex is 2, negative 7, so I'm going to make a point down there and say 2, negative 7. Okay, I want you guys to try 4 and 5. Now 6, A is negative 3, B is negative 24, C is negative 42. We're going to use this formula again. So plug in. So we're going to bring that negative because that's part of the equation, and then negative 24 is our B over 2 times A, which is negative 3. When you have two negatives right next to each other, that means the opposite of negative 24. The opposite of negative 24 is a positive 24 over 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. When you divide that, you get negative 4. So don't forget x equals negative 4. That's your axis of symmetry. And then remember, you plug in negative 4 to this equation. So it's going to be negative 3. You're just going to bring that negative 3 down, times negative 4 squared, minus 24 times negative 4 minus 42. So we have to do this first. So negative 4 squared is 16. It's a positive 16 because negative 4 times negative 4 is positive 16. And then here, negative 24 times negative 4 is a positive 96, and then bring down that minus 42. Okay, now we can multiply negative 3 times 16. And when we put all that in a calculator, we get 6. So our vertex is negative 4, 6. We're going to be opening down because A is a negative 3. That's our axis of symmetry, which is x equals negative 4, and negative 4, 6 is our vertex. Okay, now look here. Notice how we have the square term and we have an x term, but we don't have our c term. You really have to be careful here. This is your A, this is your B, and we don't have a C. Okay, here you have an A and you have a C, but you don't have your B term, because remember, your B term is always with the x, your C term doesn't have an x, and your A term always has that x squared. So A equals -1, B equals 4, C equals 0. And you don't even have to say that, but C is nothing, right? There's no C. So let's plug into our formula. So negative B means negative, so we're going to put the negative there, and then 4. All over 2 times A, which is -1. So that means -4 over -2, which is 2. And we're going to put that there as x equals 2. Our vertex, remember we plug in the 2, so we're going to rewrite that equation. And we're going to plug in 2 for x. Now again, remember, when we plug in, see how there's a negative x here? We're going to bring down that negative. It's telling us it's a negative whatever we get for x squared. So negative keeps getting brought down, and we do 2 squared first, which is 4, and it's going to be negative because that sign just keeps dropping. So 2 squared is 4, and then it's the opposite of it because of that negative that was in the original equation. And then plus 8, so y equals 4. So your vertex is 2, 4. It's going to be opening down because A is -1. Our axis of symmetry is x equals 2, and our vertex is 2, 4. Okay, so here A is 1, B is 0, and C is -3. So the last one we'll do together, and then you guys are going to try number 9. Okay, so notice how B is 0 here. So A is 1, C is -3, but there's no x term, so there's no B term, so B is 0. Okay, so if we plug this in, that means it's -0 all over 2 times 1. Well, 0 over 2 here, anything, when you ever have a 0 on top of a fraction, it always equals 0. So that means your axis of symmetry here is going to be x equals 0. And then you're going to plug 0 in for x, so you're going to rewrite that equation. And you're going to plug 0 in for x to find y for your vertex. So y is -3, because 0 squared is 0 minus 3 is -3. So your vertex is 0, -3. It's going to be opening up because A is positive. Your axis of symmetry goes straight through the center, and you're going to label that x equals 0, and then your vertex is 0, -3. Okay, so try number 9.